The morning air hung thick with humidity as Serafina Dubois flipped the sign on her shop door from closed to open. Outside, the French Quarter was already stirring to life. Street musicians tuned their instruments on corners, shopkeepers hosed down sidewalks, and early tourists wandered by with maps clutched in hand. "Looks like another scorcher," she muttered, wiping her brow with her forearm as she headed back to the kitchen. Sierra's sweets had been in her family for 3 generations. The small beignet shop sat wedged between a jazz club and a fortune-teller's parlor on a side street just off Jackson Square. The blue and white awning had faded over the years, but the glass display cases inside gleamed, ready for the day's fresh batch of beignets. As Sarah tied her dark, curly hair back with a bandana, she glanced at the stack of bills on her desk. The red, final notice stamps seemed to glow ominously in the early morning light. Her fingers instinctively went to the locket around her neck, her mother's, a habit whenever anxiety crept in. "One day at a time," she reminded herself, echoing the phrase her grandmother had repeated like a mantra during hard times. By 6:30, the sweet scent of fried dough and powdered sugar filled the shop. Sarah worked methodically, her hands moving with practiced precision as she rolled out dough, cut squares, and dropped them into hot oil. Each perfectly golden piece emerged from the fryer to be buried under an avalanche of powdered sugar, her secret recipe, with a touch of vanilla bean and cinnamon. The bell above the door jingled as her first customer of the day entered. Louis, a saxophone player who performed in the square, had been coming in every morning for 15 years. "Morning, Cher," he called, his voice as smooth as the notes from his saxophone. "Smells like heaven in here." "Morning, Louis." Sarah smiled, sliding his usual order across the counter, 3 beignets and black coffee. "How was last night's crowd?" "Good tippers," he replied, dropping a few extra dollars in her tip jar. "Unlike some folks around here." She knew exactly who he meant. Mr. Beaumont's latest offer, or rather, threat, delivered yesterday by his slick-haired assistant. The real estate developer had been trying to buy her building for months, with offers growing more aggressive as she kept refusing. By mid-morning, the shop had settled into its usual rhythm. Tourists mingled with locals, everyone drawn by the smell of fresh beignets and Sarah's warm smile. She chatted with customers as she worked, asking about their plans or their families, remembering little details that made people feel special. It was during a lull that she noticed him. A man she'd never seen before stood by the powdered sugar station. Tall, with broad shoulders filling out a worn leather jacket despite the heat. His chestnut hair curled just past his collar, and stubble darkened his jaw. But it was his hands that caught her attention, quick, nimble fingers moving with practiced stealth. He was pocketing her powdered sugar mix. Not the customer containers, but the large canister behind the counter that held her special blend. Sarah moved silently around the counter, years of navigating the narrow shop allowing her to approach unnoticed. When she was directly behind him, she cleared her throat. "That's $25 a pound," she said flatly. The man turned, and Syrah found herself staring into eyes the color of bourbon, warm amber flecked with gold. A slow smile spread across his face, revealing a dimple in one cheek. "Worth every penny, I'm sure," he replied, his voice laced with the local drawl, yet something else beneath it. "But I was just curious about the secret to the best beignets in New Orleans." "The secret," Sarah said, holding out her hand, "isn't for sale." "Or for taking." To her surprise, he laughed and pulled the small bag from his pocket, placing it in her palm with a theatrical bow. "Remy LeBeau, at your service." Professional appreciator of fine things. "Thief, you mean?" Syrah corrected, tucking the sugar back where it belonged. "Such an ugly word for such a beautiful morning." Remy leaned against the counter. "I prefer opportunist." Sarah folded her arms. "Well, Mr. Opportunist, in my shop we pay for what we take." "Fair enough." He pulled out a worn leather wallet and placed a 20 on the counter. 1 order of your finest beignets, then. I hear they're worth stealing for. Despite herself, Sarah felt the corners of her mouth twitch. There was something disarming about his brazen charm. She turned back to the kitchen, aware of his eyes following her. As she arranged 3 perfect beignets on a plate, the bell above the door chimed again. Sarah looked up to see a man in an expensive suit enter, Jordan, Mr. Beaumont's right-hand man. "Miss Dubois," he said, his tone clipped and formal. "Mr. Beaumont asked me to check if you've reconsidered his offer." Sarah's smile vanished. "Nothing to reconsider. My answer's the same as yesterday, and the day before." Jordan sighed. Theatrically. "He suspected as much. That's why he asked me to give you this." He slid a manila envelope across the counter. "Notice of code violations from the city inspector. Apparently, this building needs significant updates to meet current regulations." Sarah's stomach dropped as she opened the envelope. The list of violations, and their associated costs, was longer than her arm. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice tight. "This building was inspected 6 months ago." Jordan shrugged. "Regulations change." "Mr. Beaumont's offer still stands. It would more than cover your debts and these repair costs." "How convenient that the inspector found all these problems right when your boss wants my property," Sarah snapped. "Just delivering the message." Jordan adjusted his tie. "You have 2 weeks to address the issues, or Mr. Beaumont will be forced to report them to the city." As Jordan turned to leave, Remy stepped directly into his path. "Excuse me," Jordan said stiffly. Remy didn't move. Instead, he took a large bite of beignet, powdered sugar cascading down the front of Jordan's immaculate suit. "Oops," Remy said, clearly not sorry. "Clumsy me." Jordan's face flushed as he brushed frantically at the white powder. "You'll be hearing from Mr. Beaumont," he spat at Sarah before pushing past Remy and out the door. When the bell stopped jingling, Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath. She looked down at the violation notice, the numbers swimming before her eyes. "Blackmail with a side of extortion," Remy remarked, peering over her shoulder. "This Beaumont fella doesn't play nice, does he?" "He wants to tear down half the block for some luxury hotel," Sarah replied, unsure why she was confiding in this stranger. "My shop's the last holdout." Remy studied her face, thoughtful. "So what's the plan, sugar?" "Plan?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "I don't have the money for repairs, and the bank won't extend my loan." "There is no plan." "There's always a plan," Remy said, licking powdered sugar from his thumb. "Or there could be, if you've got the right partner." "Partner?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I happen to have certain skills that might be useful against men like Beaumont." Remy leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Con men recognize their own kind. And that man," he nodded toward the door, "works for a con man in an expensive suit." "And why would you help me?" Sarah asked, skeptical. Remy held up his empty plate with a grin. "For starters, unlimited access to these heavenly creations. And your special sugar. You want to help me fight a millionaire developer in exchange for beignets?" "I have my reasons," Remy replied, something flickering behind his eyes that suggested more than he was saying. "But yes, that's the general idea. You feed me, I help you outsmart Beaumont." Sarah knew she should refuse. The man had literally been caught stealing from her minutes ago. But as she looked down at the violation notice again, desperation clawed at her chest. "I must be crazy," she muttered. She extended her hand. "Deal." Remy's grip was warm and firm. "Deal." As they shook hands, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made either the best or the worst decision of her life. "First things first," Remy said, suddenly all business. "Tell me everything you know about this Beaumont character." The afternoon rush had died down, when Remy returned to Syrah's suites. He disappeared hours earlier with a promise to gather intelligence, whatever that meant. In the meantime, Syrah had spent the lull between customers calling contractors about the supposed violations. Each quote was more disheartening than the last. The bell above the door jingled as Remy swaggered in, looking far too pleased with himself. "Learn anything useful?" Sarah asked, wiping down the counter. "Beaumont Development isn't just eyeing your block," Remy said, helping himself to a leftover beignet. "They've got projects all over the city. But this one, the Crescent Moon Hotel, is personal for the big man himself." "Personal how?" "Word is, Beaumont grew up not far from here. Dirt poor. Now he's buying up his old neighborhood to prove he's made it." Remy leaned casually against the counter. Classic nouveau riche behavior. "How does that help me?" "Know thy enemy." Remy tapped his temple. "The more we understand what drives him, the better we can predict his next move." Sarah sighed. "Knowing why he wants my shop doesn't change the fact that he's winning. Not for long." Remy pulled a business card from his pocket. "I paid a visit to the inspector who filed your violations." "You what?" "Relax. I posed as a contractor looking for work. Turns out the man loves to talk, especially when bourbon's involved." His grin turned sly. "And guess what? He and Beaumont go way back. College roommates." "So it is rigged," Sarah muttered, a mix of vindication and fresh despair settling over her. "Completely. But now we have proof." Remy held up his phone. "Our friendly inspector had a lot to say about falsified reports and kickbacks after his third drink." Sarah listened to the recording, her eyes widening as the inspector slurred through damning admissions. "This is great," she said. "But will it be enough? Beaumont's got money. Lawyers." "We're just getting started," Remy cut in. "Tomorrow night, Beaumont's hosting a charity gala at his mansion. All of New Orleans' elite will be there." "And?" she asked warily. "And we're going to crash it." His eyes gleamed with mischief. "We can't just walk into a private event," Sarah protested. "With the right clothes and the right attitude, you can walk in anywhere," Remy said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Besides, I've arranged invitations." Before Sarah could ask how, the shop door opened again. A tiny elderly woman entered, her arms laden with shopping bags. Despite the heat, she wore a vibrant head wrap and an impressive collection of beaded necklaces that clicked with every step. "Aunt Matilde!" Sarah exclaimed, hurrying around the counter to relieve her great-aunt of the bags. "I wasn't expecting you today. The cards told me you needed help," Matilde said matter-of-factly, her voice surprisingly strong for her small frame. Her sharp eyes landed on Remy and narrowed slightly. "And I see they were right." "Aunt Matilde, this is Remy Lebeau," Syrah said, watching as her great-aunt studied him with open curiosity. "He's helping me with the Beaumont situation." "Lebeau," Matilde repeated, rolling the name over her tongue. "I knew a Lebeau family once. Troublemakers, the lot of them." Remy grinned. "Some things never change, madame?" Matilde cackled, clearly delighted. "I like this one, Seraphina. He has honest eyes." "He tried to steal my sugar mix this morning," Syrah pointed out. "I said honest, not saintly." Matilda patted Remy's cheek. "Now tell me about this plan to bring down the man threatening my niece's legacy." As Remy outlined his scheme to infiltrate Beaumont's gala, Matilda listened intently, nodding in approval. "Bold. Risky. But sometimes the direct approach is best. We need to get close enough to plant a listening device in Beaumont's office," Remy explained. "If he's pulling strings with the inspections, chances are he's cutting corners elsewhere too." "And how exactly do we get in?" "I don't exactly have a ball gown lying around," Syrah said. Matilda's eyes sparkled. "Leave that to me." She rummaged through one of her bags and pulled out a worn deck of tarot cards. "But first, let's see what we're really up against." With practiced hands, she spread the cards across the counter. Sarah watched, half amused, half anxious, as her aunt turned them over one by one. "The Tower," Mathilde murmured, tapping a card with a crumbling structure. "Sudden change. Upheaval." She flipped another. "The Devil, someone is bound by their past, and then the Two of Cups, a powerful partnership forming." Remy leaned in, surprisingly focused. "What else?" Mathilde revealed the final card. Justice, reversed. An imbalance that must be corrected. Someone has gone unpunished for too long. She gathered the cards, her expression thoughtful. "Be careful, both of you. There's more at stake than just this shop." The weight in her voice sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Mathilde was known for her flair, but this didn't feel like theatrics, it felt like a warning. "We will be," Sarah promised. Later, as they closed up the shop, Sarah found herself watching Remy as he wiped down the tables. He moved with easy confidence, but always with an edge, like someone used to keeping one eye on the exit. When he caught her looking, he winked, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "What's your real stake in this, Remy?" she asked quietly. "And don't say beignets." Remy paused, dishcloth in hand. For a moment, the charm slipped. Something harder flickered behind his eyes. "Let's just say Beaumont and I have unfinished business," he said. "And I believe in justice, even if it comes through unconventional channels." Before she could press him further, he shifted back into his usual grin. "Now, about tomorrow night. Can you dance, Chair?" "Dance?" Sarah laughed. "I run a beignet shop. When would I have time to dance?" "Then we've got work to do." Remy extended his hand. "Every good con needs a convincing performance." As he pulled her into a basic waltz between the tables, Sarah tried to ignore the warmth rising in her chest. This was business, she reminded herself. Nothing more. But when Remy drew her closer to adjust her posture, his hands gentle but firm at her waist, business was the last thing on her mind. The Beaumont mansion sprawled across prime Garden District real estate, its white columns glowing under strategically placed lights. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway as valets rushed to accommodate arriving guests. "Remember," Remy murmured as they approached the entrance, "you're Elise Fontaine, distant cousin of the Fontaine shipping family, recently returned from Paris." "And you're my," Sarah trailed off, still uneasy with the lie. "Business associate," Remy supplied smoothly. "Here to help you explore investment opportunities in New Orleans." Sarah nodded, adjusting the emerald green gown Mathilde had somehow procured. The silk rustled as she moved, making her feel both elegant and entirely out of place. "You look stunning," Remy said, his gaze lingering appreciatively. He himself cut an impressive figure in his tuxedo, hair slicked back, every inch the polished businessman. "Where did you even get these clothes?" Sarah whispered as they joined the line of guests presenting invitations. "Let's just say I know people who know people," Remy replied with a wink. When they reached the front, Remy handed over their forged invitations with absolute confidence. The doorman barely glanced at them before waving them through. Inside, the mansion was a shrine to wealth and ego. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, original artwork adorned the walls, and floral arrangements larger than Sarah herself exploded from every corner. "Subtle," Remy muttered, snagging 2 champagne flutes from a passing waiter. "Drink this, it'll help with the nerves." Sarah took a sip, the bubbles dancing across her tongue. "So now what?" "Now we mingle. Get the lay of the land." He nodded toward a cluster of well-dressed guests. "Beaumont will make a grand entrance later. When he does, I'll slip away." You keep the attention on you. Keep the attention on me? How am I supposed to do that? Remy grinned. You'll think of something. Before she could protest, he guided her into the main ballroom, where couples swirled across the polished floor to the music of a live orchestra. Mr. and Mrs. Fontaine, a voice rang out. Sarah turned to see a woman in her 60s, dripping in diamonds, making a beeline for them. Mrs. Holloway, Remy greeted her smoothly. A pleasure. Though I should clarify, Miss Fontaine and I are not married. Merely colleagues. Oh, the woman looked between them with renewed interest. How modern. You must tell me all about Paris, my dear. We have a pied-à-terre in the 16th arrondissement. As Remy had predicted, Sarah soon found herself surrounded by curious socialites, eager to hear about her fictional Parisian life. She drew on her limited college French and scraps of knowledge from travel shows, weaving a plausible narrative that seemed to satisfy her audience. From across the room, she caught Remy's approving nod just before he slipped through a side door. Now, all she had to do was maintain the charade until he returned. An hour later, her face ached from forced smiles, and Remy still hadn't reappeared. Worse, she'd spotted Jordan, Beaumont's assistant, watching her from across the room, his expression sharp and suspicious. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice boomed over the speakers. Please welcome your host, Mr. Richard Beaumont. The crowd applauded as a distinguished man in his 50s took the stage. Richard Beaumont had silver hair, a deep tan, and the confident air of someone used to commanding a room. His smile was dazzlingly white as he launched into a speech about his charitable foundation. Sarah edged closer, studying the man who was threatening her livelihood. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. And now, Beaumont concluded, please enjoy the rest of your evening. The silent auction to benefit underprivileged youth closes at midnight. As he stepped down from the podium, guests swarmed him. Sarah watched him work the room with practiced charm. Where was Remy? Had something gone wrong? Her question was answered moments later when the lights suddenly dimmed and spotlights swung toward the grand staircase. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Remy descended, microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hush. Mr. Beaumont has been far too modest. In addition to tonight's charity auction, he's generously arranged a special entertainment. Beaumont's face shifted from confusion to alarm, but hemmed in by his guests' expectant gazes, he could only smile tightly. That's right, Remy continued, reaching the bottom of the stairs. I'm tonight's special performer, and I need a volunteer. His eyes found Sarah across the room. The beautiful woman in green, perhaps? Before she could react, the crowd had parted, clearing a path between them. Remy strode forward, extending his hand with theatrical flair. Trust me, he whispered as he led her into the center of the ballroom. Time for a distraction. To Sarah's horror, Remy announced they would perform a traditional tango. As the orchestra struck up a passionate melody, he pulled her close. I can't dance like this, she hissed. Sure you can, he murmured against her ear. Just follow my lead. And when I spin you toward Beaumont, act like you're losing your balance. The next few minutes blurred into a whirlwind of motion. Remy was an exceptional dancer, guiding her through steps far more intricate than anything they'd practiced. The crowd watched, entranced, as he spun and dipped her across the polished floor. Then came the moment he'd warned her about. As he twirled her directly toward Beaumont, Sarah stumbled, deliberately, crashing into the developer. I'm so sorry, she gasped, clutching his arm for balance. She felt Remy's hand brush past her back, planting something on Beaumont she realized with a jolt. No harm done, Beaumont replied smoothly, steadying her. Up close, his cologne was cloying, and something in his gaze made her skin crawl. You dance beautifully, Miss Fontaine, she supplied. Elise Fontaine. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Fontaine? Any relation to the shipping family? Distant cousins, she said quickly, recalling Remy's script. We should discuss business sometime, Beaumont said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm always looking for investors in my latest project. I'd like that, Sarah replied, injecting as much polite enthusiasm as she could muster. Before Beaumont could respond, Remy reappeared at her side. Apologies for the interruption, Mr. Beaumont, he said smoothly. May I reclaim my partner? Beaumont's eyes shifted to Remy, and the change was immediate. The warmth vanished, replaced by a flash of cold recognition. Of course, he said, voice clipped. Enjoy your evening. As Remy led her away, Sarah whispered, What was that? He looked at you like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe he has, Remy said, his tone cryptic. Mission accomplished, by the way. The bug's planted, and I got photos of some very interesting documents in his study. Let's get out of here, Sarah muttered. I think Jordan's on to us. They were nearly to the exit when a firm hand clamped down on Remy's shoulder. They turned to find Jordan, flanked by 2 security guards. Mr. Beaumont would like a word, Jordan said, his tone leaving no room for argument, privately. Remy squeezed Sarah's hand. Wait for me in the garden, he said under his breath. If I'm not there in 10 minutes, take the car and go. Before she could protest, he was already being escorted away, his posture tense despite the easy smile on his face. Jordan glanced back at Sarah. His gaze lingered for a moment, his frown deepening with what looked like dawning recognition. Sarah stood frozen, heart pounding. That lingering look from Jordan terrified her. Though the dress and makeup had transformed her completely, she couldn't shake the fear that he might recognize her. She hovered on the edge of action, torn between obeying Remy's command and chasing after him. A commotion near the bar gave her the answer. 2 rough-looking men had entered, scanning the crowd with predatory focus. When one of them caught her eye, he nudged his companion and started in her direction. Heart pounding, Sarah slipped through the nearest door and into a dimly lit garden. She hurried along the gravel path, breath clouding in the night air. Behind her, the door creaked open, followed by the crunch of approaching footsteps. Sarah! A voice hissed from the shadows. Remy stepped out from behind a hedge, his bow tie hanging loose, a fresh cut above his brow. What happened? She gasped. Change of plans, he said, gripping her arm. Beaumont recognized me. We need to go. Now. Those men? She began. Old associates, Remy said grimly. Also looking for me. This night just keeps getting better. They moved quickly through the garden toward a side gate. As Remy fiddled with the lock, Sarah heard shouting back near the house. Hurry, she whispered. The lock finally clicked open, just as flashlight beams swept across the hedges. Remy yanked the gate wide, and they slipped through into the night, running until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Several blocks and a hasty cab ride later, they stumbled into Sarah's apartment above her shop, breathless, rumpled, and wide-eyed. What the hell just happened? Sarah demanded, kicking off her heels. Who were those men? And how does Beaumont know you? Remy dropped onto her couch, all charm drained from his face. He looked pale, drawn, haunted. Remember when I said Beaumont and I had unfinished business? He said finally, voice low. It's complicated. Uncomplicated, Sarah said, arms crossed. I deserve to know what I'm mixed up in. Remy exhaled and ran a hand through his hair, further mussing it. Then he looked up at her, expression raw. Richard Beaumont's real name is Richard LeBeau, he said. He's my father. Silence filled the apartment as Sarah tried to process Remy's revelation. Your father? She said at last. The man trying to destroy my business is your father? Remy nodded, his expression grim. He left when I was 8. Changed his name, reinvented himself. Left my mother with nothing but debts, and a son she couldn't handle. And he recognized you tonight, Sarah said slowly, realization dawning. That's why he wanted to talk to you privately. He wasn't thrilled to see his past walk into his fancy party, Remy said, voice edged with bitterness. Even less thrilled when I told him I know about his crooked deals. Sarah sank down beside him on the couch. So this was never about helping me. It was about revenge. It started that way, Remy admitted. When I heard Beaumont was leaning on a beignet shop owner in the quarter, I figured it was my chance to get close. I didn't expect. He trailed off, his gaze catching hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. Didn't expect what? She asked quietly. You, he said simply. I didn't expect to care about you or this place. The honesty in his voice twisted something inside her. Before she could reply, her phone buzzed, Aunt Matilda's ringtone. Aunt Matilde? Sarah answered quickly. It's late. Is everything? Men came to the shop, her aunt cut in, her voice tense. They broke in. I called the police, but you shouldn't come back tonight. Sarah's stomach dropped. Are you okay? I'm next door at Marie's. The police are here now. A beat. Serafina, be careful. The cards warned of danger. After promising she'd stay away, Sarah hung up, her hands trembling. Someone broke into the shop, she said to Remy. Those men from the gala? Probably Tucker and Royce, Remy said, jaw tightening. Old partners from Chicago. A job went south. They've been tracking me ever since. So now I've got your father trying to steal my property and your criminal associates breaking into my shop. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. You really know how to complicate a girl's life, Remy LeBeau. I'm sorry, he said, voice low. I'll go. This is my mess, not yours. He stood, but she caught his wrist. Wait. She drew a steadying breath. We're in this together now. You and me. Against Beaumont, your father. Remy looked down at her hand, then met her eyes. You're either the kindest or craziest woman I've ever met, Serafina Dubois. Probably both, she said with a faint smile. Now, what did you find in Beaumont's office? Remy pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. Beaumont's not just forging inspection reports. He's laundering money through his developments. The Crescent Moon Hotel? It's being funded with offshore cash. I'd bet my last dollar it's dirty. Can we prove it? With what I grabbed tonight, and the bug I planted? We're close. He flipped through more images. But here's the kicker. Guess who's on the list of potential tenants for the new hotel? Viktor Sokolov. Should I know that name? Russian businessman. Alleged mob ties, Remy said. Beaumont's planning to use your location as a front. The beignet shop would become a cash business, technically owned by Sokolov, but really controlled by Beaumont's people. Sarah felt her stomach turn. No wonder he's been so persistent. It's not just about real estate, Remy agreed. It's about creating the perfect setup for laundering money. They spent hours piecing through the evidence, connecting the dots between Beaumont's legitimate ventures and his darker dealings. By dawn, they had a clearer picture of the operation, but still not enough solid proof to take to the authorities. We need the audio from the bug, Remy said with a yawn, stretching, and we've got to stay ahead of Tucker and Royce. Sarah nodded, fighting her own exhaustion. We should sleep. Tomorrow's Sunday? Shop's closed. We can regroup then. She offered Remy the couch, too tired to worry about the propriety of letting a near stranger stay the night. As she changed out of her gown and into pajamas, she heard him moving quietly in the living room. When she emerged from the bathroom, she found him standing at her window, watching the street below. Do you think they'll come here? She asked softly. Eventually, he said, but not tonight. They're not that good at tracking. Unlike you, she said, unable to hide the tease in her voice. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. I've had practice staying one step ahead. It must be exhausting, she observed. Always running, always looking over your shoulder. You get used to it, he said. It's the only life I've known since I was 17. What happened when you were 17? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Remy was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. My mother died, he said finally. Cancer. I couldn't afford treatment. Couldn't even keep the lights on after she was gone. So I started running scams. Turned out I was good at it. The matter-of-fact way he said it made something twist in Sarah's chest. I'm sorry about your mother. He gave a small nod of thanks. What about you? How'd you end up with a beignet shop? Family legacy, Sarah said, settling onto the couch. My grandmother opened it. My mom ran it after her. When she died 5 years ago, it became mine. Ever want to do something else? Sometimes, she admitted. But the shop connects me to them. To where I come from. She twisted the locket at her neck. Besides, I'm good at it. I like making people happy with something simple, like a good beignet and hot coffee. Remy studied her, thoughtful. That's a rare gift, making happiness. The way he said it made her cheeks warm. She stood abruptly. You should get some sleep. Pillows and blankets are in that cabinet. As she turned to go, Remy called after her, his voice soft. Sarah? She paused, glancing over her shoulder. Thank you, he said. Thank you, he said, for believing in me despite everything. The vulnerability in his eyes made her heart skip. Good night, Remy, she said, retreating to her room before she could do something foolish, like kiss him. In the morning, Sarah woke to the smell of coffee. She found Remy in her kitchen, hair tousled, stubble darker on his jaw, looking surprisingly domestic as he flipped pancakes. You cook? She asked, accepting the mug he offered. Man can't live on stolen beignets alone, he quipped, sliding a plate toward her. Besides, seemed like the least I could do. They ate in companionable silence until Remy's phone buzzed. His expression tightened as he read the message. We've got problems, he said. The bug picked up Beaumont talking to Sokolov. They're accelerating the timeline. They know someone's onto them? What does that mean for us? It means we move faster. Remy stood, already pacing. And we need help. Who's going to help us against someone like Beaumont? Remy's grin returned, his old confidence lighting up his face. You'd be surprised how many people in this town have bones to pick with Richard Beaumont. By noon, Sarah's apartment had become an impromptu war room. Remy called in favors from across the city. A court clerk who owed him for a past kindness brought copies of Beaumont's development permits. A bartender from the quarter showed up with stories of Beaumont's drunken boasts about owning the city inspectors. Even Louis, the saxophone player, stopped by, revealing that Beaumont had threatened street performers to clear the way for his projects. This is bigger than just my shop, Sarah realized, watching the growing pile of evidence exposing Beaumont's corruption. Always has been, Remy said, spreading papers across her small dining table. Beaumont builds his empire by pushing out the little guys. Your shop's just the latest target. Aunt Mathilde arrived around 2, shopping bags in hand, filled with herbs and candles. For protection, she explained, placing small bundles in the corners of Sarah's apartment. And clarity of purpose. She pulled Sarah aside while Remy spoke with the court clerk. The cards were right about him, she murmured, nodding toward Remy. The devil card, bound by his past. But there's goodness there, beneath the scars. I know, Sarah said softly, watching Remy's animated gestures as he explained something to the others. In just a few days, he'd become someone she couldn't imagine not knowing. Be careful with your heart, child, Matilda said gently. But don't guard it so tightly that love can't find a way in. Before Sarah could protest that it wasn't like that, Remy called for everyone's attention. Here's what we know, he began, pointing to their makeshift evidence board. Beaumont's been bribing city officials, falsifying permits, and preparing to launder money through the Crescent Moon Hotel. His partnership with Sokolov brings in the cash. Beaumont provides the legitimate front. And the listening device? Sarah asked. It gave us some useful audio, Remy confirmed. Enough to prove Beaumont knows exactly what he's doing. But we still need something stronger. Bank records, wire transfers, hard documentation. Which would be in his office at the development company, the court clerk supplied. Impossible to access without getting caught. Remy's smile was pure mischief. Nothing's impossible, with the right plan and the right team. This is insane, Sarah whispered, adjusting her cleaning staff uniform as she pushed a cart down the hallway of Beaumont Development's headquarters. The best plans usually are, Remy replied through the tiny earpiece she wore. He was parked in a van across the street, monitoring the building's security cameras he'd hacked into. The plan was simple, at least in theory. Sarah would pose as part of the evening cleaning crew to access Beaumont's office while he attended a city council meeting. Meanwhile, Remy had phoned in a water leak on a lower floor to draw security's attention away from the executive level. You're clear, Remy said. Office is at the end of the hall. Keycard should work. Thank our friend in HR for that. Sarah swiped the stolen card. Her heart pounded as the lock clicked green. She slipped inside, pushing the cart ahead of her like she'd done this 100 times. Beaumont's office was exactly what she'd imagined, lavish and overdone. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the Mississippi. One wall was a shrine to his ego, photos of ribbon cuttings, handshakes with politicians, luxury developments gleaming in the background. Start with the filing cabinet behind his desk, Remy directed. There's a false bottom in the second drawer. As Sarah searched, she kept glancing at her watch. They had a 20-minute window before the next scheduled security sweep. Found it, she whispered, pulling out a stack of documents. She began photographing each one with her phone, just as Remy had shown her. 15 minutes, Remy warned. She worked quickly, capturing images of transfer records, offshore account numbers, and most damning handwritten notes detailing payments to city officials. Check his desk calendar, Remy said. She flipped open the leather-bound planner. VS final arrangements, French Quarter location, she read aloud. He's meeting Sokolov tomorrow. At my shop? That's our chance to catch them both, Remy replied. 10 minutes, Sarah. Start wrapping up. As she slid the papers back into place, something caught her eye, a framed photo, half hidden behind the others. She picked it up and froze. It showed a much younger Beaumont, smiling beside a dark-haired woman and a small boy with unmistakable amber eyes. Remy, she whispered, her voice trembling. I found a photo of you. With your parents. The earpiece went quiet. After a long pause, Remy's voice came through, tight. Bring it. Another beat, then steadier. 5 minutes. Time to go. Sarah slipped the photo into her uniform pocket and carefully returned everything else to its place. She was just reaching for the door when it swung open. Jordan stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as they swept over her uniform and the cleaning cart. I don't recognize you, he said slowly. Where's the regular cleaning lady? Sick? Sarah replied, keeping her head down and her voice pitched lower than usual. I'm covering. She held her breath as Jordan stared at her for a beat too long. Finish up quickly, he said at last. Mr. Beaumont doesn't like people lingering in his office. When the door shut behind him, Sarah exhaled shakily. That was close, she whispered. Too close, Remy agreed through the earpiece. His meeting's ending early. Get out now. Sarah made her way through the building, pushing her cart with forced calm past the distracted security staff. Only once she was back in the van with Remy did she allow herself to breathe freely again. We did it, she said, handing him her phone with the photos. Remy scrolled through them, his expression sharpening with each image. This is it! Bank transfers, names, dates, everything we need to prove the laundering. He fell silent as Sarah pulled out the framed photo. In the tight space of the van, she watched the muscle in his jaw tense as he stared at the image of his younger self with his parents. He kept it, Remy murmured. All these years. He kept a photo of us. Maybe there's more to the story than you know, Sarah offered gently. His expression darkened. Or maybe he just likes remembering the family he walked away from. Another trophy from a successful escape. He tossed the photo aside and turned the key in the ignition. Either way, it ends tomorrow. Once we get the recording of his meeting with Sokolov at your shop, we take it all to the FBI. Back at Sarah's apartment, they walked through the final steps of their plan. According to Beaumont's calendar, he and Sokolov would meet at the closed beignet shop to finalize their deal. We'll have cameras set up throughout the shop, Remy explained to the small group gathered in her living room. If they say anything incriminating, that, combined with the documents, should be enough. And if it isn't? Sarah asked. Remy offered a faint, tired smile. Then we move on to backup plans B through Z. As the others filed out with their assignments, Sarah remained alone with Remy. The last few days had drawn them together in unspoken ways, glances that lingered too long, late-night conversations that stretched into dawn. You should get some sleep, Remy said, gathering the papers scattered across the table. Tomorrow's the biggest performance of your career. What about you? She asked, noting the shadows under his eyes. I'll crash on the couch again, if that's okay. Sarah nodded, then hesitated before adding, Thank you. For all of this. Even if it started as revenge against your father, what you're doing for me, for the shop. Don't thank me yet, Remy said, his voice low. This could still go sideways in a dozen different ways. But it might not, she countered, stepping closer. We might actually win. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The tension between them had been building for days, electric, undeniable. Sarah, he began, voice rough. I'm not. If you say you're not good enough, I'll throw something at you, she cut in. I'm a grown woman. I know who you are. Do you? He challenged. I'm a con man, Sarah. I lie for a living. Not to me, she said with quiet conviction. Not about the important things. For a moment, she was certain he would kiss her. But instead, Remy stepped back, putting distance between them. Get some rest, he said softly. Tomorrow changes everything. Alone in her room, Sarah touched the locket around her neck, her mother's. She wondered what her mother would have thought of Remy LeBeau, and the storm he'd brought into her life. Despite everything, the risk, the chaos, she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so awake. So alive. Morning came too fast. She awoke to find a note on her nightstand, written in Remy's quick, slanted handwriting. Gone to set up. Meet at the shop at 3 p.m. Don't come early. R. She spent the hours leading up to the meeting reviewing their plan, trying to steady the nerves that refused to settle. When she finally arrived at Sarah Suites, the street outside was unusually quiet. No tourists, no street performers. Remy? She called, unlocking the front door. The shop was dark, the familiar scents of sugar and coffee stale from the days it had been closed. Back here, came his voice from the kitchen. She found him crouched behind the counter, installing the last of several tiny cameras. "Everything's ready," he said, straightening. "They'll be here in 30 minutes. "Remind me what I'm supposed to do again?" she asked, fussing nervously with the crooked chair. "You supposedly left town after the break-in," Remy reminded her. "Jordan's going to let them in with the master key. We'll be hidden in the storage room, listening to everything." The plan was simple, almost too simple. Sarah glanced toward the window. "Where is everyone?" "The street's dead out there." Remy gave her a sheepish look. "I may have arranged a small gas leak scare at the corner. Just enough to clear the area without tipping off Beaumont." As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's anxiety grew. This was it, her one chance to save the shop and expose Beaumont's corruption. "What happens after?" she asked suddenly. "If this works?" Remy glanced at her, hearing the question beneath the words. "Let's focus on today," he said. "Tomorrow will take care of itself." Before she could press further, his phone buzzed. He checked the security feed. "They're early," he muttered. "Into the storage room. Now." They slipped inside just as keys rattled in the front door. Through a narrow crack, they watched Jordan usher in Beaumont and a heavy-set man with a thick accent, Sokolov. "The location is perfect," Beaumont was saying. "High tourist traffic, cash business already established. No one will question the flow of money." "And the owner?" Sokolov asked. "Being handled," Beaumont said dismissively. "She'll sell. Everyone has a price." "Not everyone," Remy whispered, his breath warm against her ear. They listened as the men laid everything out, how much money would be laundered through the Beignets shop, which officials were on their payroll, timetables for renovations. "This is gold," Remy murmured, watching the camera feeds on his phone. "They're confessing to everything." But just as it seemed they had all they needed, the storage room door was yanked open. Jordan stood there, gun drawn, flanked by 2 burly security guards. "Look what I found, Mr. Beaumont," he said with a smug grin. "Rats in the walls." Beaumont's expression shifted from surprise to fury as they were dragged out into the main shop. But when his gaze landed on Remy, something else flickered behind his eyes, something older. "Personal." "Remy," he said, voice quiet, almost nostalgic. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," Remy spat. Sokolov looked between them. "You know this man." "My son," Beaumont said, still staring at Remy. "My very resourceful son." "How convenient," Sarah snapped, finding her voice. "Catching him breaking into a property you've been trying to acquire. Trespassing charges make it easier to force a sale, don't they?" Beaumont turned a cold glare on her. "Ms. Dubois, I should have known you'd be involved in this little amateur spy ring." He nodded at Jordan. "Did you check for recording devices?" "Found and disabled them all, sir." Sarah's stomach dropped. Without those recordings, they had nothing, just paperwork that could be shredded by expensive lawyers. "What do we do with them?" Sokolov demanded. Beaumont didn't miss a beat. "My security team will escort them somewhere. Private. We'll discuss the consequences of their actions there." Remy tensed beside her. This was spiraling out of control. "Before you do something you'll regret," he said evenly. "You should know we've already sent everything we found to the FBI. Bank records, bribes, the whole operation." Beaumont gave a thin smile. "A bluff? You were always good at those." Remy met his gaze. "Want to bet your freedom on it?" A tense silence filled the shop as Beaumont studied his son's face, searching for any sign of deception. "Search them," he said at last. Jordan patted them down, pulling out their phones and Remy's small recording device. After checking it, he gave a curt nod. "Nothing's been sent. Take them out the back." Beaumont instructed the guards. Make sure they understand the cost of interfering in my business. They were being shoved toward the rear exit when the front door burst open. Two rough-looking men stepped inside, the same ones Sarah had seen at the gala. Well, the taller one drawled. If it isn't Remy LeBeau. Been looking all over for you, partner. Tucker, Remy acknowledged, voice tight. Perfect timing, as always. Beaumont's expression soured. Who are these people? Old friends, Tucker replied, his hand drifting to his waistband where pistol was clearly visible. Remy here owes us a considerable sum. Get in line, Beaumont scoffed. Whatever he owes you, deal with it elsewhere. We have business. Our business takes priority, the second man, Royce, cut in. Unless you want the cops hearing about your little meetin' here. The air grew heavier as Beaumont's security squared off with Remy's former associates. Sarah watched Remy's eyes flick rapidly between them all, calculating. Everyone calm down, Remy said, raising his hands. I'm sure we can find an arrangement that works for everybody. As he spoke, he subtly stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her with his body. Beaumont narrowed his eyes. I'm listening. You let Ms. Dubois go, Remy said. She walks out of here, unharmed. In return, we keep quiet about the recording Jordan missed. Jordan snapped his head toward him. What recording? Remy gave a tight smile. The one broadcasting this whole conversation to my good friend at the Times-Picayune. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral, though she knew it was a bluff, a Remy classic. He's lying, Jordan said sharply. Maybe, Remy allowed. But are you willing to bet your freedom on it? Imagine tomorrow's headline, Developer Beaumont caught in money laundering scheme. Even if there is a recording, it's your word against mine. Who do you think people will believe? A respected businessman or a known con artist? That depends on the other evidence we have, Remy shot back. Like the documents from your office safe. This time Sarah caught it, a flicker of uncertainty in Beaumont's eyes. You're bluffing. Let Ms. Dubois go, and you'll never have to find out. The standoff dragged for what felt like hours, but was only seconds. Finally, Beaumont gave a sharp nod to one of his guards. Show the lady out. Not the front, too visible. I'm not leaving without Remy, Sarah said, her voice steady. Yes, you are, Remy replied, locking eyes with her. There was something in his gaze, a silent plea, a message she couldn't quite read. Go, now. As the guard reached for her arm, Tucker stepped forward. Not so fast. We still have unfinished business with LeBeau, which you can handle after hours, Beaumont snapped. The argument that followed gave Sarah just enough cover. She caught Remy's eye and glanced subtly toward the kitchen. His barely there nod told her he understood. Fine, she said loudly, pulling away from the guard. I'll go. But I need my purse from the kitchen. I'll get it, the guard offered. No need, she said quickly, already moving. I know exactly where it is. In the kitchen, she hurried to the industrial mixer, reaching behind it for the small device Aunt Mathilde had helped her plant days ago, an old-fashioned tape recorder still whirring quietly. Not everything depended on smartphones and the cloud. She slipped it into her pocket, just as the guard appeared in the doorway. Hurry up. Back in the main shop, the situation had escalated. Tucker now had his gun drawn, aimed at Remy, while Beaumont's security team had their weapons out as well. This isn't necessary, Beaumont was saying, tone surprisingly calm. Whatever he owes you, I can cover it. Why would you do that? Sokolov asked, voice sharp with suspicion. Something passed across Beaumont's face. Regret, maybe. He's my son. The son you abandoned, Remy said bitterly. I did what I had to do, Beaumont replied, defensiveness creeping in. Your mother. Don't you dare talk about her, Remy snapped, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah was being ushered toward the back door, when the front door burst open again. This time, a squad of police officers poured in, weapons drawn. Police! Everyone freeze! Chaos erupted before she could even process what was happening. Beaumont's guards went for their weapons. Sokolov bolted for the kitchen. Tucker yanked Remy in front of him as a shield. And through the confusion, a small, colorful figure slipped inside, Aunt Matilda. Down! The elderly woman commanded, her voice ringing with unexpected authority. She flung something into the center of the room, one of her herb pouches, which exploded into a cloud of choking, acrid powder. In the haze, Remy broke free from Tucker's grip. He grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her behind the counter just as officers tackled and subdued the armed men. When the dust settled, Beaumont, Sokolov, Jordan, and the others were in handcuffs. Detective Marcus, a regular at Sarah's suites, strode over to them. Perfect timing, Sarah said, exhaling with relief. Thank your aunt, the detective replied, nodding toward Mathilde, who was calmly dusting powder off her patchwork shawl. She called in a tip, said her niece was in danger from armed men at the bakery, threw in some talk about money laundering, too. Sarah pulled the tape recorder from her pocket. This should help your case. As the police led the arrested men out, Beaumont paused beside Remy. For what it's worth, he said quietly, leaving was the biggest mistake of my life. Remy's face remained unreadable. Save it for your lawyer. Only when the final police cruiser pulled away did Sarah allow herself to believe it was truly over. Her shop was safe. Beaumont's schemes exposed. The nightmare ended. How did you know to plant the recorder? Remy asked, studying her with a new kind of respect. I didn't trust all this fancy technology, she said with a shrug. Aunt Mathilde suggested we have a backup. The aunt in question approached, looking immensely pleased with herself. The cards never lie, she declared with a wink. Justice has been served. The weeks following Beaumont's arrest passed in a blur of police statements, news stories, and unexpected fame for Sarah's Sweets. Tourists and locals alike flocked to the little bakery where the infamous developer had been caught, eager to taste the beignets worth committing crimes for. Sarah hired 3 new employees just to keep up with demand. The financial troubles that had plagued her only weeks earlier were quickly becoming a distant memory. Remy stayed to help with the transition, though he remained vague about his future plans. Every day, Sarah found herself watching the door, wondering if today would be the day he vanished from her life as suddenly as he'd entered it. You're frowning at the sugar again, he said one afternoon, catching her lost in thought behind the counter. Just thinking. Dangerous pastime, he teased, swiping a freshly made beignet. After everything they'd been through, she no longer protested his sugar thefts. They offered me a deal, he said suddenly. The DA's office. Testimony against my father and his associates in exchange for immunity for my past indiscretions. Sarah looked up sharply. Are you going to take it? Already did. His smile was bittersweet. Turns out going straight is easier than I thought. So what now? She asked, trying to sound casual. Remy studied her face for a long moment. That depends, he said quietly, on whether there's a reason to stay in New Orleans. The question hung between them, full of unspoken hope. Before Sarah could answer, the shop door burst open in a flurry of colorful fabric and jangling beads, Aunt Mathilde, practically vibrating with excitement. It's happening, she announced to the packed bakery. The parade. They moved up the time. Sarah had nearly forgotten. Today marked the start of Mardi Gras weekend, the city's grandest celebration. The first parade was scheduled to pass right by the shop. Come, Matilda insisted, grabbing both their hands. "You can't miss it." Outside, the street had transformed into a riot of color and sound. Floats adorned with feathers and glitter drifted through throngs of revelers. Beads flew through the air. Brass bands filled the air with music that made the pavement thrum. Standing on the sidewalk amid the joyful chaos, Sarah felt something lift from her shoulders. This, the joy, the community, the beating heart of New Orleans, this was what she'd been fighting to protect. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said to Remy, who was watching the spectacle with wide-eyed wonder. "Never seen anything like it," he admitted. "I've been a lot of places, but nowhere feels like this." "That's New Orleans for you," she replied. "Gets under your skin." Remy turned to her, his voice softer now. "It's not just the city, Sarah. It's you. You got under my skin in ways I never expected." Around them, the parade raged on. Loud, bright, electric. But in that moment, it might as well have been just the two of them. "I'm not good at staying in one place," he said. "Not good at putting down roots. But for you, I want to try." Sarah reached up, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "I'm not asking you to change who you are, Remy." "I know." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "That's what makes you different. You saw me, really saw me, from day one. When you were stealing my sugar," she said with a laugh. "Best theft of my life," he said, pulling her closer. "Though I think you stole something from me too." "What's that?" "My heart," he smiled, "not sure I want it back." As the grand float approached, a massive golden crown glittering in the sunlight, Sarah made her decision. She rose on tiptoe and kissed him,